Right, so we return to a story from earlier on where the courts are to decide the fate of the conference, elective conference that took place in KwaZulu-Natal in 2015. There were some members of the party who said that it was unjust, it was unfair, and it needs to be rerun. They took the case to court, and the judgment is going to be handed down tomorrow. So it could have far-reaching implications, and we now cross to our studios in Durban, where analyst Lukhona Mnguni is standing by to help us unpack what those far-reaching consequences may be. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the program. So this is quite an important case, and two sides of the ANC in the same province want their results to stand. If it does get reversed, the elective conference result, what will that mean for the ANC in the province?
Well, good evening, Peter. The first thing that it would mean, of course, is that a further bigger cloud would be cast over the current leadership of the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal. It would be deemed as having been illegitimately appointed, and therefore a rerun of that conference of November 2015 would have to happen. But of course, we would have to apply a bit of brakes, because anybody who loses this case is definitely most likely to appeal it. If it is the provincial leadership that loses, they've got a two-stage appeal process. That's to the Supreme Court of Appeals and then to the Constitutional Court. Unlike if the other side were to lose, if the people sympathetic to Senzo Mnguni were to lose, I think they would do what happened in Free State in 2012. They would seek direct access to appeal to the Constitutional Court, so that they try and expedite the process just to make sure they probably secure a ruling before the conference in December. So, of course, if the current leadership appeals, Peter, then the status quo will remain, but questions of illegitimacy, and depending on how far-reaching the judgment would be in expositing the reasons as to why they believe that the current leadership was illegitimately elected, if those are really far-reaching, people would then definitely be able to say there are no reasonable prospects for success even in an appeal, and start undermining the current leadership until they exhaust the court process. What it does mean, though, is that the leadership would also have it difficult to enforce any law and order within the province. And if any sort of radical challenge to the leadership happens from the ground, so if there's a revolt from structures, especially the regions that do not support or do not prefer the candidate that is preferred by the Provincial Executive Committee, those are your regions like the Lower South Coast, probably regions around Malahleni and so on, would probably find reason to try and undermine the authority of this leadership at all costs, and do their own parallel processes, knowing very well that within time, even up to the Constitutional Court, they would still be ruled as having been elected illegitimately. So what it does is that whatever the ruling is tomorrow is going to create some fertile ground for a bit of disorder and a lack of a center that is legitimate and well respected, and that can actually dispense authority to everybody in a fair and just manner in the province.
All right, I don't know. I mean, this may be difficult to ascertain, but do we have a sense of just how big each grouping is? If you had to assign a percentage, just to get a sense of the division in the party in the province, what is the split, do you think, between those sympathetic to Senzo Mnguni and Sihle Zikalala?
Look, Peter, it is a difficult question to answer, but I'd probably say we are looking at a really tight balance, 60-40, 55-45, still much leaning towards the provincial leadership of Sihle Zikalala in terms of the region-wide ground support. That is the feeling that one gets, at least in terms of interacting with ANC members, of interacting with ANC activists, and just trying to really gauge a sense throughout the province as to how far are people supported. And of course, the other thing that is difficult, Peter, is that KZN is a very complicated province politically, I say at at times, in the sense that you'll find that certain people that are opposed to Sihle Zikalala are not necessarily opposed to the candidate that Sihle Zikalala promotes or is seen to be promoting, that being the person of Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. And in that event, it becomes very difficult to read support for the current provincial executive committee using people's preferences at a national level. But I do think that the ground has become very tightly contested, and we've got a record of history. I think if we were to look at how close at some point the James Nxumalo versus Zandile Gumede regional conference was contested in the eThekwini region before the last conference that installed Zandile Gumede as chairperson, which of course the James Nxumalo grouping had boycotted and decided not to necessarily participate in that process. Also, if you look at the contest between Sihle Zikalala and Senzo Mchunu, while Sihle Zikalala is said to have won with a good majority, but the figures were not too far apart. Not too far apart, Peter, and that gives us an indication that generally the groundswell is literally tightly contested, and like I said, I'd probably give it a 60-40, 55-45, but still in the favor of the incumbent leadership.
All right, so this elective conference happened in 2015. I mean, as far back as then, was it already about Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma? Because it didn't seem obvious at that point, or did people know and were already campaigning on that basis, even though it was perhaps at a low level?
Most certainly, Peter, in 2015 it had nothing to do with the national politics. Like I said, KZN is a very complicated province. I tend to say the national dynamics in the ANC take advantage of local discord in KZN. If there wasn't the issue of a Zandile Gumede versus James Nxumalo, which precipitated into the provincial level as a Senzo Mchunu versus Sihle Zikalala issue, I think if the province was united, even on the national question today, they would be singing in one voice. Opportunistically, the national divisions are playing themselves out in KwaZulu-Natal, not because inherently KwaZulu-Natal is divided by the national question. I do not see it that way. I see it more as having been an issue that there were local disagreements, and these local disagreements quickly sharpened into almost an SACP versus ANC issue, because James Nxumalo was seen at the time as a strong SACP person, sort of being sidelined in eThekwini, and I think the problems germinated from that division that happened in the eThekwini region. A number of attempts were done to try and hold that regional conference, and they didn't work out. And then people decided, no, let's go for the provincial conference because that one seems easier to win. And then we resolve eThekwini region in favor of the current leadership. And all these things, some of them, of course, are part of the papers that were placed before the court to say a letter from the Secretary General, Gwedemantashe, had indicated that he advises that the provincial conference doesn't go ahead until the matter of eThekwini region is sorted out. But of course, history tells us that that didn't happen, and then the provincial conference went ahead, and then the eThekwini matter was resolved after that conference. So I would say that the national dynamics are just taking advantage of local divisions in KZN, and if KZN locally were to be united, literally the divisions would move much closer, and probably you'd have a much more united province. Is it a little bit too late? It is probably a bit too late at this stage in time, because those who have taken the current leadership to court, we know that the ANC has always had the view that people are self-expelling if they take the leadership to court. But however, everybody has it in them that they must listen to whatever the court verdict is, and they must abide by it, because after all, if we do not do that, then we will be undermining the rule of law.
All right, so we've run out of time, but perhaps one final question, if you could answer it quickly. Whatever the decision tomorrow, could that feed into the political violence that we're seeing right now? And what then happens after December? Do things quieten down and then people start to try and fix things ahead of a general election? Or what happens?
Peter, a loaded question that needs a bit more time. Literally, political violence has become part of the cycle of local government elections and especially national conference elections of the ANC. This is probably the most tense and tightly contested conference of the ANC in recent times, since 1991's conference that was here in Durban. So I do think that we haven't seen the last of the spate of political violence, not necessarily just within KZN, but countrywide as well. And I've been saying to people they must watch the Eastern Cape as if something, because some things are developing there which are becoming seen as part of political violence as well. So I think, Peter, let's give it some time. Difficult to say what happens post-December conference, because that is all dependent on the December outcome. If the Ramaphosa people lose, there is the view that the SACP will definitely cut ties with the ANC, and some people might ride on that SACP cutting ties with the ANC to form a splinter group, but all of that is to be left to time, definitely, Peter.
All right, Lukhona, thank you very much indeed. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for your insights this evening. Francis.